Uzak Şehir delivered everything we love about Turkish TV dramas. A slow burn romance, sizzling chemistry between the leads, emotional twists, and of course, plenty of angst. But did season one get derailed by a pregnant mistress trope? Today, I'll break it all down. What worked, what didn't, and whether Uzak Şehir lives up to the hype. Let's get into it. Welcome to Just Dizis, the podcast where we recap, review, and deep dive into the love stories, the heartbreak, and the wild plot twists of Turkish TV dramas. My name is Marjani, and I'm so excited to kick off our very first episode with a retrospective on season one of Uzak Şehir, also known by its English title, Distant City. Now, before I jump into the highs and lows of the season, the quick heads up that this episode is a full spoiler review. So if you haven't watched this show, I highly recommend you go check it out and then come right back here so we can unpack it together. Also, full disclaimer, I don't speak Turkish. It's a beautiful and rich language, but I'll be honest, the pronunciations are not my strong suit. So please accept my apologies in advance for butchering any names. All right. I want to start with what I loved most about Uzak Şehir, which is a slow burn romance between Alya and Cihan. This was the emotional core of the series for me. And when I say slow burn, I mean it in the best possible way. I'll be honest, I don't usually enjoy slow burns. Most of the time, they feel artificially prolonged with silly obstacles or plot contrivances to keep the couple apart. But Uzak Şehir delivered a slow burn romance that felt intentional, thoughtful, and deeply earned. And that comes down to great writing and chemistry between the leads that's elevated by strong performances. Sinem Ünsal, who plays Alya, and Ozan Akbaba, who plays Cihan, brought a magnetic and fiery chemistry to their scenes that wasn't just about physical attraction. It was also about the emotional connection between them. This tension was felt in the silences, the stolen glances, and especially in their arguments. Their chemistry was the glue sustaining the slow burn romance throughout the entire season. And it was clear the writers had a vision for how this love story would unfold over the 28-episode arc. Nothing ever felt rushed or forced. Alya's character is one of the most consistent and relatable female leads I've seen in a Dizzy. She didn't make choices that felt out of character just to drive the plot, and Sinem Ünsal brought a groundedness to the role that made Alya's journey compelling. She wasn't perfect, but her actions always made sense within the context of the show. And then there's Cihan, and I have to say, this was my first time seeing Ozan Akbaba in a role, and he was absolutely sublime. He gave Cihan this quiet power. The way he moved, the way he held back. He made the character feel alive and complex. And what I loved most was how much detail Ozan poured into the role. Cihan wasn't just stoic, he was nuanced. And underneath that controlled surface was a man slowly unraveling emotionally as he fell in love with Alya. The arc of the slow burn romance between Alya and Cihan was appropriately paced and gripping. I don't want to break down the key moments and milestones throughout the course of the season that really propelled their love story forward. From the start of the season, Alya is forced into a situation that feels unjust. She's a grieving widow, a mother trying to protect her son, who's suddenly trapped in the world she never asked to be a part of. But as she navigates the world of Mardin, she begins to find power in her voice and harness an inner strength that will carry her through the season. The dynamic between Alya and Cihan in the early episodes brought a fresh and unique take to the enemies to lovers trope. And that moment in episode 3, when Cihan throws Alya in jail, was fascinating to watch. Of course, he did it to stop her from fleeing with her son and agree to marry him. But he also made sure she was safe and comfortable. And in those scenes, you could already see this push and pull between exerting control, but also exhibiting care. And that would come to characterize much of their relationship in the season. By the time we get to their wedding, Cihan clearly showed a deep attraction to Alya. He was captivated by her strength and her defiance. But for Alya, Cihan was still very much an obstacle for her. But there was still a growing respect and a sense that he's also her safest ally, especially when dealing with Sadakat. Post-wedding, a key milestone in their relationship was the moment in episode 9 when Alya puts her hand on Cihan's shoulder to comfort him when Kaya was sent to jail. For Alya to voluntarily reach out to show compassion for his emotional state spoke volumes because no one checks in on Cihan. He's the strong one, the protector, the tribal leader. He carries the burdens of everyone around him. But in that scene, he gets to just be a man in pain and Alya sees him. And having Monet watching it all unfold from the sidelines was just icing on the cake. That scene was so layered and it felt so earned, and I surprisingly got the same thrill out of it as watching a first kiss. Then came episode 10, when Alya discovers Baran's video message asking Cihan to marry her. That discovery helped to reframe the dynamic of her relationship with Cihan moving forward. It wasn't just that she learned that Cihan's motivation for marrying her was to honor his brother's last wishes. It also showed Alya that Baran had not only lied to her about his family and his past, but more than that, he had manipulated her future from beyond the grave. By choosing his brother to be her husband, Baran was essentially making it impossible for her to move on and find love again after his death. But what's brilliant about this reveal is that it frees Alya from her guilt. And at this point, she no longer sees Cihan as the architect of her entrapment, but as a fellow prisoner of Baran's selfish choices. After that reveal, Alya and Cihan were able to deepen their connection, which brings us to the fantastic airport scene in episode 12. This was one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire series because Alya finally had the chance to escape. She had her passports, her plane tickets, she had Denise with her, but just as she was about to pass through airport security, she freezes. And Cihan is just standing behind her, silently watching, not intervening, just waiting to see what she would choose to do. And Alya showing that she wanted to stay was a pivotal milestone for their relationship. From Cihan's standpoint, he was no longer the villain in her story, keeping her trapped in Mardin. They were now in this marriage together by mutual choice, and the emotional shift between them from this point on was palpable. But then comes the heartbreak in episode 15, when Alya discovers the truth about Cihan's past with Monet. And this wasn't just a casual secret. It was a betrayal that hit her where she was most vulnerable. Up until that point, we'd seen Alya slowly start to trust Cihan, to let her guard down and to genuinely open herself to the possibility of a future with him. And right when she's finally emotionally stepping into that space, she's blindsided. The look on her face when she realizes he's been lying to her, not just about a relationship, but about a woman who is still very much present in their lives, was devastating. It wasn't just about the deception or jealousy. It was the realization that she had truly developed feelings for Cihan, but now she had to let him go. Alya didn't want to feel like she was the other woman or an unintentional interloper blocking a 6-year relationship that she felt hadn't fully run its course, despite what Cihan claimed. This leads us to episode 17, which was my favorite episode of the entire season. This was where Alya was determined to divorce Cihan. The banter and the arguments between them was emotional and raw, but at the same time, very fun to watch. Their fights throughout the episode felt like a storm finally breaking after weeks of built-up tension. And when that pent-up emotion exploded later on in the episode, Alya started throwing and breaking things in the bedroom, which of course was immediately stopped as Denise entered the room. But it was so symbolic afterwards when Alya and Cihan both kneel to pick up the shattered pieces from off the floor, signaling that the relationship might be broken, but they're both still willing to pick up the pieces together. It was so beautiful. And then the episode ends with Cihan's courtroom confession of his love for Alya during their divorce proceedings. Wow. The vulnerability, the honesty, the sheer emotional weight of that moment was so well written and so beautifully played by Ozan. I probably watched that scene 50 times. But of course, Cihan immediately undermines it all in the next episode by lying to Alya and pretending his declaration of love to the judge was just a legal tactic to stop them from getting a divorce. But I believe Alya saw through Cihan's lie and knew it wasn't just a strategy. Deep down, she knew Cihan meant every word, but it was easier for both of them to pretend otherwise, because at that point, Alya wasn't mentally and emotionally ready to fully step into that truth and admit to Cihan that she felt the same. The introduction of Alya's mother in episode 19, while done rather poorly in my opinion, was a catalyst to gain more insight into Alya's character and encourage her to fully open her heart to Cihan. And as we get closer to the season finale, we definitely see Alya begin to show physical affection for Cihan. She began holding his hand, putting her head on his shoulder, allowing him to sleep next to her and Denise, and hugging him multiple times, not just because she needed comfort, but also because she was happy. And I have to say, reflecting on Alya's journey throughout the season, I do believe that Alya probably finds more emotional fulfillment in Cihan than she ever did in her first marriage to Baran. From everything we know about Baran, he appears to be more carefree than his brother, but also more selfish. He intentionally hid his past from Alya and made decisions that served himself rather than Alya's best interests. Cihan, by contrast, is steady. He's a provider, a protector, and while Alya might fight against his excessive need for control, Cihan can offer someone like Alya, who carries deep abandonment trauma, that stability and sense of security that can be deeply comforting and help to heal those emotional scars. So when we get to the end of the season and finally get a love confession and a kiss between Alya and Cihan, it felt so earned. But I have to admit, I found the kiss to be a little underwhelming. Something about the positioning of their faces during the kiss, the stiffness of it, and the lack of movement, it just felt awkward. And after 28 episodes of sexual tension, I needed this kiss to be more passionate and cinematic. And we know the show can deliver great cinematography. I mean, I still get chills from that gorgeous tracking shot in episode 19, when Cihan was looking down at Alya from the mansion, and Alya was looking up at Cihan from the driveway, while they both walk in parallel towards the stairs. I mean, that scene was so beautiful. So I have no idea why the show didn't bring that same energy to their kiss. I mean, this was their grand finale. But don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting a graphic makeout session in the middle of the airport, but I was expecting it to feel sensual and intimate, and it just didn't land that way for me. But so, after all the buildup, the emotional roller coaster, the misunderstandings and reconciliations, we got a kiss and an unequivocal declaration of love. And that ultimately gave a satisfying close to this season-long arc for Alya and Cihan. And I'm dying to see how the relationship progresses in season 2. Now, I want to talk about our second couple in Uzak Şehir, which is Nare and Sahin. I have to admit, I didn't immediately jump on board this ship. In fact, it took me a while to warm up to their love story, despite finding both characters very likable. When we meet Nare in the pilot episode, she's married to another man by her own choice and pregnant with his child. And yet, the show wanted me to buy into this epic love between her and Sahin, who is still very much single, childless, and clearly still in love with her. I understood that Sadakat disapproved of the relationship, and yes, Sahin wasn't willing to run away with her at the time, but it still felt like Nare gave up too easily on their love. And if she wasn't fighting for it, then why should I be invested in it? That said, there was undeniable chemistry between Nare and Sahin from the start, and they looked beautiful together. But their storyline for about 2/3 of the season felt very repetitive to me. It was one step forward, one step back. They'd agreed to run off together, but then something would get in the way, and then Nare would declare it was over. And then somehow we'll end up right back in the same position later in the season. It was just rinse and repeat. It honestly became frustrating. I kept wondering how many times they would keep doing the same dance. How many more times do we have to watch Sahin get beaten up by Sadakat's goons while Nare just stands there and watch? But then my interest in their love story changed when Sahin decided to go rogue and fight for control of the tribe against Cihan. When Sahin admitted to Nare that his motivations weren't just about power, he was fighting to become worthy enough to marry her. That was the turning point for me. From that moment on, I was fully on board the Nare and Sahin ship, and I was rooting for their happiness since they're both my favorite characters outside of Alya and Cihan. Shane's constant struggle between being a dutiful son to his hateful father on the one hand and wanting to embrace his love for Cihan, Kaya, and Nare on the other was compelling, but also sad to watch. Likewise, Nare's constant abuse by her mother and husband was heartbreaking, and her attempted suicide was the darkest moment in the show for me. And I have to say, I was disappointed with how the show handled Nare's suicide attempt, particularly because Sadakat's contribution to her mental state went largely overlooked. And believe me, I'll definitely get to Sadakat's lack of accountability later. But I was also disturbed by the shoehorned redemption arc given to Nare's abusive husband before his death. It felt like the show was trying to tell me that it was the right thing for Nare to stay by her abusive husband's side because he had put his life in jeopardy to donate an organ to her. Now, while Özkan definitely did the right thing by saving Nare, and a level of gratitude from Nare is appropriate, this act does not absolve him of years of abuse. Let's not forget that the reason she needed the organ in the first place is because he was responsible for driving her to commit suicide. So it was crazy to me that the show kept pushing this message that Nare needed to devote her life to taking care of Özkan and forgo any relationship with Şahin. So I was relieved and happy that Özkan was killed off the show and Nare and Şahin were finally able to get their much-deserved happy ending in the season finale. Şahin's proposal to Nare at the waterfall was romantic, tender, and visually stunning. Nare was glowing. She was practically radiant. And I have to give so much praise to Sarah Sass, the actress who plays Nare, because she perfectly conveyed Nare's happiness in that moment. And the kiss between Nare and Şahin in the water was absolutely beautiful. It was soft and sweet, but also sensual. I mean, this was exactly the kind of cinematic kiss that I wanted for Alya and Cihan. But I digress. That proposal scene and their subsequent elopement in the finale elevated Nare and Şahin's love story for me. It made up for all of my frustrations with their storyline earlier in the season. And I can't wait to see Sadakat's reaction to their marriage. Of course, we know there will be many struggles for Nare and Şahin in season 2, especially with the reveal that Şahin's father had Baran killed. But I'm excited to see how they navigate these challenges together as a married couple. Now, much like Nare and Şahin, our other couple, Kaya and Zerrin, were already in love at the start of the season. And again, much like Nare and Şahin, it took me a while to warm up to their romance. That was probably because I didn't expect to care much about Kaya initially. He was the typical hot-headed younger brother. He was impulsive, emotional, always on the verge of getting himself into trouble. And yes, he definitely leaned on Cihan to bail him out more than once. But over the course of this season, Kaya genuinely grew on me. His relationship with Zerrin was complicated, and yeah, I didn't root for them initially. But something about the way Kaya fought for her won me over. Unlike Nare, who I felt gave up too easily on Şahin early on, Kaya refused to walk away from Zerrin, even when it was messy, even when it was reckless. And I think I really started to get on board with the Kaya and Zerrin love story when he kidnapped her from her wedding to another man. It was selfish and short-sighted, given the repercussions to his family and the threat to his life. But there was something kind of endearing about that conviction, even if his actions were chaotic. What also made me grow to like Kaya more was his dynamic with Alya. Their sibling-like bond was a pleasant surprise for me in the show. When Sadakat had Alya physically dragged out of the mansion in episode 21, Kaya was the one who showed up and stood by her side in defiance of Sadakat. And afterward, when Alya, Nare, and Kaya were all sitting together laughing about how Alya burned the mansion gates down, that moment melted my heart because it showed that Alya had a sense of family and support beyond her relationship with Cihan. It also helped to explain Alya's growing emotional attachment to her life in Mardin, outside of just her marriage. And I'd like to see Alya's bond with both Kaya and Nare continue to develop in season 2. Now, I want to turn to a pairing that I definitely could not get behind, and that was Zerrin and Demir. It was infuriating watching Zerrin give in to Demir's blackmail and choose to marry him, especially since she could have fought harder to get out of it. She also never took any of the opportunities to walk away from him and end their marriage. Rather, she constantly let Demir continue to manipulate her out of some strange sense of honoring her promise to a man who blackmailed her with her brother's freedom. But having her tethered to Demir gave emotional stakes to her love story with Kaya. However, I just could not abide by the transparent attempt by the writers to plant seeds for a potential enemies to lovers romance between Zerrin and Demir. Now listen, I'm a huge fan of the enemies to lovers trope, and I've shipped plenty of love stories that started with a forced marriage. But the Demir and Zerrin pairing is a turnoff for me because the chemistry between them just isn't there at all. Some of their scenes felt forced, like the writers were telling us there was romantic tension between them, rather than actually making us feel it. What really frustrated me was the poor attempt to soften Demir's character through his treatment of Zerrin. One example of this was the moment in episode 23 when he finds out Zerrin is pregnant with Kaya's child. He angrily drags her, kicking and screaming, to a clinic without explaining why. So naturally, Zerrin assumes he's taking her to get an abortion against her will, and she's absolutely terrified. But of course, when they show up to the clinic, the doctor tells her that she's just there for a checkup. And somehow the show thought this would ingratiate me to Demir's character. But instead I was actually horrified. He intentionally tormented Zerrin for no reason, knowing that the stress on her body could trigger a miscarriage. And the fact that the writers thought this would make him seem more caring and likable was wild to me. But it's still difficult for me to imagine that the grand plan is for Zerrin and Demir to be endgame, especially knowing that Zerrin is pregnant with Kaya's child, even if she's lying to Kaya and letting him believe that Demir is the father. That secret has so much potential for drama between Kaya and Zerrin, but I just don't see it working as a setup for a romance between her and Demir. In fact, I was actually surprised we didn't get a scene in season 1 where Alya somehow examines Zerrin at the hospital and does the math and the timing of her pregnancy and realizes there's no way Demir could be the father. Maybe we'll get it in season 2, and I hope we do, because it would be interesting to see whether Alya chooses to tell Kaya or not. Regardless, I expect Kaya's new fiancé will prove to be quite the troublemaker in season 2 and will sow chaos in the Kaya, Zerrin, and Demir triangle. And I'm absolutely here for it. Now, I want to turn to what I disliked the most about the show. And it would probably come as no surprise that I was not a fan of the character of Sadakat. And look, the evil mother-in-law is a classic Dizzy trope. But Sadakat took that archetype to a whole new level, and not in a fun love-to-hate her kind of way. The lack of accountability for her heinous actions throughout the season was aggravating. The woman literally shot Alya and tried to kill her. And somehow, 2 episodes later, it's barely ever mentioned again. No legal fallout, no true reckoning. It was just wild to see Alya continue to live under the same roof as that woman, knowing that she could kill her at any moment without suffering any meaningful consequences. What made it worse was how passive Cihan was when confronting Sadakat. For someone who's supposed to be the head of the Albar tribe, his reactions to his mother's abuse were tepid at best. He would just give her a few stern words, a disappointed stare, perhaps a vague, empty threat, and then nothing. Meanwhile, Sadakat perpetuates her emotional, verbal, and physical abuse on a weekly basis with impunity. That episode 21 moment, where Sadakat orders Cihan's men to drag Alya out of the mansion, that should have been the breaking point. But again, no repercussions for Sadakat. Cihan doesn't even confront his own staff that manhandled his wife, yet he has the audacity to throw a jealous fit over Alya having coffee with a male coworker. It just didn't make sense. The inconsistency in Sadakat's character also drove me crazy. First, she demanded that Alya and Cihan get married, but by the time the wedding came around, she's against it. Then she becomes completely fixated on Cihan having a biological son without any care for who the mother would be. She even embraced Minay after learning about Minay's pregnancy, and she previously despised Minay. So if she had so little regard for which woman would bear her grandson, it never made sense to me why she didn't just encourage Alya and Cihan's relationship, since that could lead to them choosing to have more children. And don't get me started on the audacity of her making Cihan feel guilty about his feelings for Alya, when she herself had children for 2 brothers. The fact that no one ever called her out on this blatant hypocrisy was mind-boggling. It seems Sadakat's motivations changed depending on what the plot needed, not what made sense for her character. I was never convinced that her fear of Alya's influence over Cihan sufficiently warranted the level of irrational hatred she displayed for Alya. These inconsistencies with Sadakat also extended to her treatment of Nare. One moment she's having Nare dragged back to her abusive husband, but then later in the season, John was able to easily overrule her and let Nare stay in the mansion. It left me questioning why Cihan even allowed Sadakat to perpetuate the abuse of Nare if he had the power to stop it all along. And this is what really hurt the story for me. Sadakat's unchecked power made Cihan look weak. I needed to see a scene where Cihan drew a hard line in the sand with Sadakat, but it didn't come until the end of the season when Cihan declared that he would permanently leave the mansion with Alya and Denise. But even that still seems like an empty threat. So my hope for season 2 is that the power dynamic between Cihan and Sadakat is clearly defined for the audience and consistently maintained. Cihan needs to do a better job of protecting his wife, his siblings, and even Denise from Sadakat's abuse, because I honestly can't go through another season of her unhinged and unchallenged reign without throwing something at my TV. And now we arrive at the storyline that tested every ounce of my patience this season even more than Sadakat. And that was Minay and the dreaded pregnant mistress plot that seems to be ever present across many Dizis of late. The moment I saw Minay get lightheaded, I knew it could only mean one thing. And I screamed at my TV, pleading for it not to happen. I truly believed Uzak Şehir was better than this. The writing up to that point had handled emotional complexity with so much care and nuance, especially in Alya and Cihan's relationship. So when they pulled out the old pregnant mistress trope, I was honestly disappointed. Now, I want to be fair to Minay. Her character is just doing exactly what her archetype is supposed to do in a Dizzy. She's obsessive, delusional, and clinging to a man who clearly doesn't love her. But my issue isn't just with Minay's actions. It's with how the writers dragged this storyline out way longer than necessary. But here's the thing. I don't lay all the blame on Minay. Cihan played a huge part in creating this mess. He was in a relationship with Minay for 6 years. And sure, he claims he had no intention of ever marrying her. But let's be real. You don't date someone exclusively for 6 years to the point where your entire family knows about the relationship and then get to pretend like it was just a casual fling. He continued sleeping with Minay even after getting married to Alya, while lying to Minay and telling her he had no feelings for Alya. This was emotional manipulation, plain and simple. He gave little regard for Minay's emotional well-being, despite her suicidal tendencies, even though he knew how much Minay loved him and how painful it was for her to watch him marry another woman. What made it worse was Cihan's double standards. He was sneaking off to Minay's bed every night, and then would get furious when Alya just grabs coffee with a male coworker. The hypocrisy was staggering. And look, I love a jealous male lead as much as any other Dizzy fan, but not when he's actively sleeping with another woman and then at the same time isolating his wife from other men. Now, I get that Cihan continued his relationship with Minay after marrying Alya because he thought staying with Minay would help him fight his growing feelings for Alya. And let's be honest, he needed an outlet for all the sexual tension with Alya, and Minay was always happy to oblige. Still, it doesn't mean that Cihan shouldn't be held accountable for taking advantage of Minay's feelings for him. And that's why I don't like the pregnant mistress trope. It not only undermines the quality of the show, it weakens the character of Cihan and makes him less likable. The man who was introduced as principled and generally respectful and considerate of the women in his life quickly became inconsistent, cold, dismissive, and frankly selfish. By the end of the season finale, I finally understood why the writers used Minay to push Alya to a breaking point. Minay's pregnancy and her threats to reveal Sadakat's secret to Ecmel was the impetus to force Alya to finally leave Cihan and a mansion for good. And that scene in the season finale, where Alya is leaving the mansion while Minay and Sadakat watch from above, was actually quite poetic. There was a powerful parallel to it, where Sadakat and Alya basically switched positions from where they were at the start of the season. In the pilot episode, Alya desperately wanted to take her son back to Canada, and Sadakat was determined to keep Denise and kick Alya out. But by the finale, it's Sadakat begging Alya to take Denise and leave, while Alya is the one who wants to stay. It was a smart storytelling choice, but it didn't need to originate from a pregnant mistress plot. There are so many other ways to get to that same emotional climax without resorting to a cheap cliche. So here's what I'm hoping for in season 2. I want this Minay storyline to be wrapped up at the start of the next season, and I really don't care how. Let some other man turn out to be the father of Minay's baby, or let it be a false pregnancy, whatever it takes. I just don't want this plot to be the anchor that drags down another season. Now, there's a small part of me that would love to see Sadakat and Minay drive each other crazy in the mansion, but not enough to prolong this trope, because I believe Uzak Şehir can deliver better quality writing with far more compelling storylines. So, with that being said, did Uzak Şehir stick the landing in the finale? For me, yes, it did. This show gave us a romance that was emotionally rich, anchored by outstanding performances, and an electric chemistry that pulled us through every twist and turn. The storytelling, especially in the first half of the season, was nuanced and gripping. Alya and Cihan's journey felt authentic, raw, and satisfying in the end, even with a slightly awkward kiss. But the second half of the season was uneven and got messy. Between Sadakat's unchecked chaos and Minay's overstayed welcome, the narrative momentum took a hit. And yet, despite these flaws, I still found myself fully invested in these characters and their journey. And as we move into a much anticipated season 2, I'd be interested in seeing what fresh storylines will be introduced. Perhaps Alya's biological father, who still remains a mystery. But overall, I want season 2 to lean far more into its emotional core than cheap tropes. So those are my thoughts in season 1 of Uzak Şehir. Drop a comment below and let me know what you liked or didn't like about the season. And if you want to catch more of my retrospectives on Turkish TV dramas, please like, comment, subscribe, and share this review with your fellow Disney fans. And I'll catch you next time.